tabernacle, the temple, represents the Adam and the earth. Can y'all see that? I'm going to keep asking you till I get some answers, okay? I know it's kind of warm in here, and we're going to be here a lot longer if you don't help me. If what I'm sharing with you is the truth, the first time that you see an example of this temple man is in Genesis chapter 1 through chapter 3. And you're familiar with chapter 2 and 3, specifically because it talks about Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. I believe that the Garden of Eden would have represented the holiest of holies inside Eden proper. You had Eden, and then you had the Garden of Eden. I believe that Eden itself would have represented a temple or tabernacle of Yah. And if you went into the intimate place inside, remember the fenced-off boundary where not everybody's allowed to? Nobody comes into the holiest place. I mean, the Holy of Holies, right? And so the Garden of Eden would have been fashioned after that same pattern or same blueprint as you see in the wilderness. To get into the Garden of Eden meant that you came into the holiest of holies. There's the pattern that you see beginning in chapter 1 through chapter 3. It served, in my opinion, as the prototype for what would later be built at the instruction of Yahweh in the wilderness. And if what we've been positing is the truth, and this temple and its construction is connected to the red heifer, then if what I'm telling you is the truth and the pattern's there, we'd have to see the red heifer in Genesis 1 through chapter 3, wouldn't we? Have I lost y'all? The red heifer is directly connected to the building of the temple, right? There had to be a red heifer in the wilderness. There has to be a red heifer at the second temple. There's going to have to be a red heifer at the third temple. And so if there wasn't one for the first prototype in Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3 with the Garden of Eden, then there had to be a red heifer in Genesis chapter 2 and 3. I mean, it has to be consistent or you've got a rabble. And if you pull the rabble, everything comes undone. So there has to be some consistency. That's what led me to the next subject heading, the red heifer in the Garden of Eden. The phrase red heifer, say that with me, red heifer, in Hebrew is parah adamah. If we dissect these two words, the word parah is rendered cow or heifer. It's from the two-letter root stem, the peresh, which means a bull. It could also indicate the fruit of one's lips, what you speak. The Hebrew letter hey gives it a feminine form. Now think about this, because the word parah, the root of it is the word that indicates a bull, and it's the bull that has the seed. The Hebrew letter hey means that it has a womb. It's almost as if it's contradictory. You've got a male and a female, masculine and feminine. Read Genesis chapter 1. Yahweh creates Adam in his image. He creates them, male and female creates he them. It's not until Genesis chapter 2 that he takes and builds a form for the Adam and a form for the Chava, for the Eve. Does that make sense? He had, in my opinion, from the very beginning, he had masculine and feminine together, the seed and the womb together, and he takes and separates the two for one purpose, and that purpose was so that they could produce children after his image or after his form. The purpose then of the temple would have to follow that same pattern. If you come to the temple, if you are in fact the bride, you come to the temple, which represents the man. The purpose for coming to the temple is so that you can be intimate together, so that you can produce children after his likeness and in his image. Right? Wow. The law of Genesis says that everything, every fruit has its seed within it. That's why the law of Genesis is that everything reproduces after its kind. That's why the abomination that we just heard this week, when the Supreme Court legalized, and that's why everything that's legalized isn't right. They legalized homosexual relationships. You cannot produce seed out of a homosexual or a lesbian relationship. And there are arguments, and I'm going to take a side for a second. There are arguments in the Hebrew community and in the Jewish community that nothing's said in the Torah about lesbianism, and that's a fact. And so they use that to legitimize that illicit relationship. But they don't understand everything follows the pattern of Genesis, the law of sowing and reaping. Without seed deposited in a proper womb, you have something that is an aberration. It is not functioning according to the law of Yahweh, and therefore it is an abomination. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't love and reach out and do everything we can to win those that are in those kind of relationships, because there's a flaw, just like there are flaws in you and I, and there is a prescription, a remedy. Okay? Now back online. The feminine form indicates the propensity towards receiving seed from the masculine, and then the ability to incubate that seed. That Peresh root in para forms another primitive root, parar, Peresh resh. Listen to this. And it indicates to break something, to break it. And as you break it, you frustrate the intended use of it. To make something ineffectual, to make it void, to disannul it. Now think about this. We're talking about this para adama. And then in the process of breaking it, you disannul, you therefore take away the rights of the individual that was represented here. Did you hear that? Keep that in your mind. Let's look a little bit further at the word adama. By the way, let's go back and look at that word para. How's it spelled? Peresh he. Now, if you take those same letters and just rearrange them, you have resh pe he. It forms the Hebrew rafa. It means to heal, to restore, to mend or repair something. And so within that, since each individual letter, regardless of how it's used, whatever word it's used, each individual letter will always retain its meaning, right? So even though it's para, it always will retain this para. There's something within confines of this ritual that will mend you, that will repair you, that will heal you, that will deliver you. Okay? Adama. It's from Adom. It's translated as red. If you change the vowel point, you have a Hebrew word that became an adjective there in Genesis chapter 2 to describe the form that Yahweh took from the clay and called the Adom. It meant that he was a red man. That's what was translated for generations. And people like me that get out in the sun and don't tan real well seem to fit that particular adjective. But that's not what its meaning is. Okay? If you look at its literal meaning, the aleph prefix to the front of it indicates an individual making a declarative statement. I will. Dalet means blood. I will give blood for you. It's literally what that means. When he creates the Adam, this is long before Adam falls. It's long before there's a flaw in Adam. You hear what I'm saying? But yet, there has to be a red heifer here in order to remedy a flaw. That red heifer's there, and the ashes of the red heifer are there long before the fault arises. Does that make sense to you? But just in case a fault arises, the ashes of the red heifer are here to remedy that fault. The red heifer was created before the fault was found in the Adam. Okay? In fact, the phrase para Adam can literally indicate para, meaning the fruit of the Adam. The fruit of the Adam was frustrated. It was cut off. The rights of the Adam was disannulled. Did you see that? His rights were taken away from him. Why? Because a flaw was discovered in him. When the flaw is discovered, there has to be a remedy. Yahweh didn't say, oh my goodness, I made a mistake. This guy's made a mistake. Now I have to create a remedy. No, the remedy was there long before the flaw. Hello? What you're saying is he created us imperfect. No. He created you perfect. But he knew what was going to happen, so he creates a remedy for you. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, thank him for that because we need it. No, we don't deserve it. It's his mercy, okay? Now, if you extract a definition from those two words in the title phrase, paradama, you're left with something like this. The purpose of it was to frustrate, to disannul the efforts to void the rights of and to redeem, give blood for the man. Did y'all understand that? Let me say it to you again. The purpose of the red heifer was to frustrate, to disannul the effort to void the rights of the man and to redeem, to give blood for man. You see that? You see that? The sages, looking at it, they are not making the connection. They're making a connection to the temple. And they're indicating that the purpose of the red heifer is to disannul or to frustrate the efforts to keep us from having a temple, a place to house the presence. Well, this is the presence of Yahweh. If I'm walking according to Torah, this is a tabernacle. This is a temple. Isn't that true? Do you think maybe, and I'm going to just get your attention. Everybody look at me for a second. If we believe that there are 3 physical temples, 2 of them have already been built and destroyed, and the 3rd one is about to be built, and I believe it's real close. If we believe that there are 3 temples that are built as patterns, do you think maybe those temples might be built following the pattern of the first Adam? The second Adam, Yeshua, came. He was represented in the 2nd temple, am I right? He came at the same time, 40 years after his death, burial, and resurrection. The 2nd temple was completely destroyed. The 3rd temple is coming. Do you think that the 3rd temple may be representing another Adam that's being raised up to be built? You don't know. Have you ever read the book of Peter? Doesn't he say something about you are lively stones? Is there something else said about a new building who's not made with hands? That the building is, maker is Yahweh? What building do you think he's talking about? Hello? You think maybe that 3rd temple that's going to be built, is there's a physical pattern of another spiritual temple that's being built, another spiritual man that's being built? And I tell you, that spiritual man is going to be given a physical body in the earth. I believe that physical body represented by the 3rd man, the 3rd temple, is a conglomeration, if you will, all of the fit stones joined together. And I believe that the 3rd temple is indicated in this group here and the rest of you that are scattered around the world. Can y'all see that? Pretty powerful to me. It looks to me then like the destiny of the red heifer has to follow the same pattern of that of Eve and Adam in the garden. You see an emphasis on the birthing there in the garden from the masculine perspective, the releasing of the seed. But you also see that there's an emphasis on giving birth to one whose blood will restore the imperfect out of his perfection. That's why the red heifer has to be perfect. The red heifer's perfection restores the imperfect. Do y'all see that? That's part of the conundrum. They could not understand how the ashes of the red heifer would serve to take an individual and cleanse him. He comes to one who's clean. The priest has to be a fit man, a clean man. When you come and petition for cleansing, you are an imperfect. You have flaws in you, and yet the ashes of the red heifer and the mixture there are applied to you. The one who's applying it takes your place. He literally takes on your flaw, and you're cleansed in the process. They're not making the connection with the Messiah whose blood sprinkled us. He sprinkled our conscience. He sprinkled our spirit man. He sprinkles our physical body. You see that? What I'm telling you, in my opinion, is hard to grasp if you don't understand the Torah, in particular Genesis chapter 3, because Eve, like the red heifer, was a female. And that's what a lot of people have a hard time making a connection with Yeshua and the red heifer, who's a female. The red heifer had no seed of her own, just like Eve had no seed of her own. Genesis chapter 3 says there's going to be a war between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. That's, again, a contradiction because the woman has no seed. You see that? In fact, it has to follow the pattern of Genesis. Everything has to reproduce after its kind. And so if the woman produces offspring out of the loins of Adam, then it's going to reproduce after Adam's kind, and it has, and that means that all of us are flawed, and so that seed is imperfect. So there had to be another seed source. And you know the story of the mother of Yeshua. The Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, would overshadow her. He would release the seed of Yahweh in her, and it's the seed of Yahweh that produces Yeshua. That's why it circumvents what looks as if would have been the loin of Adam. But all it does is fulfill Genesis chapter 1 and 2, indicating that what come out of the womb of the woman would be in the form of Yahweh. Y'all see that? Is this too hard? Think about this. I believe there's a connection here between Yeshua and the red heifer. Did you know that the red heifer was paid for out of the temple treasury? And did you know that Yeshua was paid for 30 pieces of silver out of the same treasury? And it's ironic because the red heifer is a female, and the 30 pieces of silver was the price of a female slave. Again, some connections here that you might not have seen before. And we're talking about Yeshua being the pattern of this temple man. He was created to represent and resemble the temple man. He became the dwelling place of Yahweh in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. You are the dwelling place of Yahweh. He should be in here, right? Unless there's a flaw in you. Think about this now and be careful, because the Jews understand that. The temple can't be built and house the presence of Yahweh without something's there to cleanse the place first. So how dare you and I? And they look at you, and they look at those that call themselves believers around the world, and they see the inherent flaw and sin in us, and they say, how can you say that you have the divine presence in you when there's been no cleansing? And if you disavow the blood of Yeshua, the cleansing agent, then of course there's nothing to cleanse this temple. And then by the law, the divine presence can't come in. Do you see that? You need to be able to understand this, because if you ever talk to a Jew regarding these particular rituals and who the Yeshua is and the fact that he came to cleanse you from sin, then this, my friend, is the conundrum that has stymied them for generations. You should understand it. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, can't you understand? Are you getting any of this? What? Don't you know? Yeah. He was depicted, Adam was, as the form of Yahweh. He was the building of the first temple. The instructions of the blueprints were given to Moshe for the temple in the wilderness at Mount Sinai. Guess what? The numeric mantra of Parah Adonah, 335, just happens to be the same value as that of Mount Sinai. Again, another sheer coincidence. What need is there for a third temple? And remember the quote of the Temple Mount Institute. The third temple serves as a body or a form to house the divine presence. I submit to you that nothing happens in the physical realm without first having the spirit realm. There cannot be a third temple physically built without there's a spiritual third temple who already has a foundation laid and the stones begin to be set up on it. Yeshua became the foundation stone. So the pattern of the third temple, even though all eyes are on the physical third temple and all eyes are on the physical red heifer that must be slaughtered to cleanse that third temple, the eyes of the world from a natural perspective see that. Those of us that look at it from a spiritual perspective understand that there already has been a red heifer that was slaughtered for you and I, and you're the third temple that's being built. You're the building whose builder and maker is Yah, not built with physical hands. The world's waiting for the other one while this one's being built right in front of their face. And the reason that they're not fully recognizing, oh my goodness, that's the third temple, is because they look at you and they see the flaw in you. Got to cleanse the temple. Adam was created a body and a form and housed the presence of Yahweh, just like you saw there in Genesis 3. And he was separated from that divine presence. That's exactly what the Jews said about the temple. The temple was destroyed, and that's the despair that we have. That's the flaw in us. We have despair because there's no way to house the presence of Yahweh in the earth. And that's the same thing. That was the conundrum of Adam and Eve. The presence of Yahweh could not come inside this flesh without the temple's curse. Can you see the connection? It's not that hard, okay? Adam's fall, like the destruction of the temple, brought great despair at its destruction and subsequent loss of Yahweh's presence. It could only be rectified, and it's my contention that the house of Adam, the temple tabernacle of the Adam, could not be rectified without the ashes, stroke, death of the red heifer. All your life, when you look at the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua that takes place at the spring festival known as Passover, you have been intentionally going in a different direction, and you've not understood that Yeshua primarily fulfilled the ritual of this red heifer. The red heifer was killed outside the city. So was Yeshua. Go figure that. It was typified in the sacrifices of the temple service, the tabernacle service. And it would stand until there was a seed of the woman that would appear. The seed of the woman appears at the time that the second temple was standing. And that seed of the woman was Yeshua. Do you see that? Now, it's not the red heifer itself that cleanses. I want you to think about that for a second. It's what remains or is gathered after the destruction of the red heifer. Okay? And that's why those that will say Yeshua or Jesus did in fact exist, and he was a prophet, but yet they will not acknowledge his destruction and subsequent resurrection. Something had to come out of the ashes, okay? If they can't acknowledge that, then my friend, there cannot be a cleansing for you and I. There cannot be a cleansing for any of mankind, and so nobody will ever inhabit the presence of Yahweh yet. If there is a cleansing remedy, and the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua stands as fact based on this ritual, and he fulfilled it to the most minute degree, that means that there is a remedy for you and I. Okay? Are y'all getting this? Turn to your neighbor and tell them, pay attention, you'll get it. I'll explain it to you afterwards. Now, the word burning here, Strong's number 8316, it's the word seraphah. By the way, you get the word seraph, which last 2 weeks ago, I believe, the burning serpents that bit the children in the wilderness, comes from this word, seraph. The word seraphim, the burning or bright shining ones, the angelic host, comes from this root. It's kind of overlooked. The burning of the red heifer and the sacrificial ritual here, all the others, the sacrifices were not burned like this one was, consumed wholly. It was a form of capital punishment reserved in particular for an adulterous person. Did you know that? How many of you remember Judah and Tamar? Remember when rumored that Tamar's committed adultery, that they go to burn her, to kill her? Most scholars overlook the fact that it was a daughter of a Levite that was caught in adultery was to be burned. That was a form of capital punishment for the daughter of the priest, right? And so Tamar was from the priestly lineage, or else she could not be burned for adultery. The purpose of this red heifer and its burning is to specifically cleanse those that call themselves daughters of the priesthood. That probably wouldn't fit any of us, even though we call ourselves kings and priests, right? When you begin to burn this animal, the rabbis teach that she was thrown in, well, actually, she wasn't thrown in, she was laid in on her back with her forelegs up. Her belly would be opened, and into the belly or to the womb would be thrown 3 items. Can you hold on a little while? I'm halfway through my slides. The first one was cedar. You look at these from the natural, you think, I can't see the spiritual application. I can see the natural application because it literally is a prescription, if you will, for a very, very powerful antibiotic cleansing remedy. Okay? Cedar, translated erez, it indicates something that's firm and strong. If you look at the way it's spelled, Aleph Resh Zion, the Aleph again indicates I will, and the Resh Zion root hints at something that's shrouded in mystery and secrecy. There's a mystery, a secrecy around this ritual. It has a numeric value of 208, which just happens to be that of the word Isaac, who was the promised seed. So there's something about the promised seed that was to come and this ritual. The word hyssop, ezav. Note the aleph again. I will. The Zion, Bav, Bet root hints at a flowing, an issue, a discharge, which can render someone unclean. Everybody look at me for a second. When you hear that, the first thing you think about is feminine discharge, a woman who's unclean because of it. Did you know that what comes out of your mouth is a bloody issue? It's a discharge that can be very unclean and cause you to be nida. Pretty interesting. Remember that hyssop and lamb's blood were applied at Passover to the doorpost, right? Was the lamb's blood visible at the cross? Was hyssop visible at the cross? In fact, he was given a liquid to drink. And the liquid was dipped in hyssop and vinegar and was placed on a reed and put in his mouth. I can't prove it. I've looked from one end to the other. I can't prove what the reed was made from, but I would be willing to bet a toe off each foot that it was from cedar, because it was put into the middle of the red heifer. Think about that. Did you know that there is a mold that grows on the common hyssop that's used to make some forms of penicillin? The scarlet wool was what was used. From crimson and blood. It's interesting because this comes from a root, yallah, which means to devour, to swallow something down, like the poison of one's words that are spoken, released, or ingested. And it reminded me of Romans 3:13. Their throat becomes an open grave. With their tongues they've used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips. You think maybe there's a connection between the cedar and the hyssop and the scarlet wool and this red heifer and the cleansing that you need? Think maybe that there's some poison that issues forth out of our mouth, a bloody discharge, a flow that comes out of us that causes us to have a flaw in us, that requires us to be cleansed before we can ever be fit vessels for the king? Sounds to me like it. These items reflect a mystery of a cleansing power that purges from a bloody flow, which, as I said, we all suffer from on occasion, because the issues of your mouth or heart can cause you to become defiled. The fire here causes a purging and a cleansing process to begin, but it's the remains, the ashes that are used with the commingling of water, living water, that produces something that's really close to what we refer to today as caustic lye. And it is a literal cleansing agent, and the tabernacle had to be cleansed frequently because blood was constantly being shed. Can you see the physical need for the red heifer? Okay. But there also is a spiritual need for the red heifer, because, listen to me, blood is continually shed for you. Oh, I know. His blood was shed once and for all for our sins. Yes, I believe that. But you have to make a continual application of the blood. And if you're continually making application of the blood in your life for the sin in your life, and then you sin again, that blood then becomes dead until it's cleansed again. You see what I'm talking about? You realize that you trample underfoot that blood, and so you have to have a cleansing agent applied to you. Does that make sense? It should. The word for ashes is the word efer, which means just that, ashes, but it's very closely related to the word for dust, afar, as made dust, meaning gray, without the red, without the blood, back there in Genesis chapter 3. In my opinion, these three items present a mystery. When you begin to understand them, in my opinion, again, it becomes a picture of the promised seed who had to drink, swallow down the poison of the cup of jealousy. See that? Because of the spoken seed that we've taken in us that made us unclean. Again, that word for burning, translated seraphah, does indicate burning, but it focuses more, listen to this, it focuses more on the destruction and what remains rather than the sacrifice. And so when you hear that word seraphah attached to the burning of the red heifer, the focus was not on the red heifer itself as a sacrifice, but what was left. The focus had to be on the residual, the ashes. It was the ashes that required the focus and attention of the house of Israel. Not everybody could take and handle those ashes. Are you with me? The seed of the woman, Yeshua, had to be born, just like this lamb. This red heifer was supposed to be without spot, without blemish, and upon which never came a yoke. The Messiah had to fit this. The word spot is the word tamim. It means something that's complete, something that's whole, that which is entirely in accord with truth and fact. If you look at the tav prefix to the front, it indicates third person future tense, he will. And then you have the mem, yod, mem, mayim. He'll water you. He'll wash you. He'll cleanse you. Aren't we cleansed with the washing of the water? It could read then, the word tamim could literally read, he will come through the water. He did. He came through the birthing canal with the waters of the womb from the woman. And yet the purpose of coming through that particular water of chaos was to take what was imperfect and make it perfect. That's why you who are imperfect, if you drink the cleansing waters without having repented, then your belly and your thigh rots out. If you have repented, or if you were not guilty to begin with, you drink the waters and you will produce seed. Revelation talks about the cup that's going to be offered to Babylon, the mother of harlots. And we're admonished to come out of her, or we're going to have to drink this cup again. Yeshua drank the cup so that you don't have to. It's my contention, hear me carefully, that this water here that was formed out of the ashes and the hyssop was there also not just to wash with, but to drink and to purge you from within. I believe that that's what David's alluding to when he says, purge me with hyssop. And I can show you an instance in the New Testament when this very water was drunk by a host of individuals. And you probably haven't seen it before. Okay? The word, I told you you'd see things you hadn't seen before. The word tamim has a numeric value of 400. We'll figure that one. If you know anything about eschatology, end time prophecy, we're told that there will be 70 times 7, 490 years. And Daniel mentions it. And he says that there will be a decree from the time from the decree to go and rebuild the temple, and it would be 69 weeks or 483 years before the Messiah appears. I believe that's when Yeshua appeared as the second Adam. A lot of people believe that the last 7 years that comprises that 483 plus 7, 490, is going to take place in the near future. If that's the case, that's 7 weeks or 7 years, week of years, that fits back into this 490, we'll see the beginning of the construction of that third temple. See how the pattern fits? No. A lot of people think that that word tamim has no merit. Has to be perfect. Yeshua had to be perfect. And he requires you to be perfect. Did you know that you are required to be perfect? That's what he says, be ye perfect. Well, what happens when I am not imperfect? The presence leaves. The temple is destroyed. There has to be something to cleanse you from that law that made you imperfect. And when you apply the cleansing agent, guess what? Rather than being called Ichabod, my spirit is departed, you now become the place where the presence of Yahweh dwells. and in his presence there's fullness of joy. Say amen. Now, that red heifer was like Yeshua. The red heifer would have to have a specific form. Yeshua had a unique covering and unique form. He had to be the image of Yahweh engraved with his covenant sign and hidden from those outside the boundary. That's why people can't understand the red heifer, the ritual. It's hidden from the vast majority of people. The average Joe that picks up the word, how intelligent you are, even if your name was Solomon. The rabbis teach that Solomon scratched his head over this ritual and he could not fathom it, even though he was considered the smartest man in the world. Why? It's because he didn't make the connection to Yeshua as the red heifer ritual. The word blemish is ma'um. It's rendered a spot, blemish, or defect. It hints at a physical defect. He cannot have a physical defect or a blemish, but it also indicates one who is morally, spiritually perfect as well. The word yoke, he would not have a yoke on him. Most people look at it and think of a curved device that sits upon the neck of a beast of burden. And in my opinion, if you look at it from the Hebrew, it's the word alal, which means something that's defiled, something that behaves or acts foolishly, something that's defiled sexually, one that gratifies his own desires. Yeshua could not be one who gratified his own fleshly lusts. He had to be one who did not have the yoke of Adam on him. He was tempted in all points, like you are, yet without sin. He did not have a yoke on him. That's what that word means, okay? If you look at it, it also carries the idea of being struck the time, like something that has been wounded unto death, being struck again to kill it. They took this word and created a legal term called double jeopardy. You ever heard of double jeopardy? Double jeopardy says that it's a procedural defense that forbids a defendant from being tried for the same or similar charges following a legitimate acquittal. You see what's being said here? Because of what Yeshua did for you, listen to me careful, you have a death sentence on you. You've been tried and you've been judged and you're guilty, but because of Yeshua and the cleansing process that you go through, after that cleansing process, when the accuser stands before Yahweh and tells them, that's an old sinner saved by grace. And you say, no, I have been adjudicated by the King of creation. I am not guilty. I've applied the blood of the Lamb to the doorpost of my heart. I am cleansed and justified by that. I cannot be convicted of that. Now, if you do fall into the trap, you do sin again, you've got to go back through the process. If you murder somebody after being acquitted for the first murder, you go through the process again. But if you never do that again, you cannot be tried for something that you've been forgiven for. And that's why you've got to realize that when the enemy reminds you of all the junk in your life and you've asked for forgiveness, he doesn't record it forgiveness. He remembers it no more. Stop crying about it. I know a lot of people that are constantly going to the altar and crying, oh, I'm just a sinner, just love God. Ask forgiveness. If you ask forgiveness, if you really meant that, 1 John 1:9 says he's faithful and just to forgive your sin and to cleanse you from all unrighteousness. He's cleansed you, and you're saved, and you're set free from that. Listen to me. Don't let the enemy keep keeping you in bondage. In fact, you can't blame that on the enemy. That's yourself. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, you've got the key. Let yourself out. Hallelujah. Yeshua, like the red heifer, was offered, so the who approaches him cleansing is forgiven. All that and think at him, try again. Let him the same or similar offense. Now, this ordinance of the red heifer, as I said, is very interesting, and there's a lot of attention being afforded it, simply because of the work to restore the temple. Jewish tradition says that there have been 9 red heifers thus far. And they are expecting the 10th heifer. And they're expecting the Messiah to offer the 10th heifer. That's why they're doing everything they can to raise up a red heifer that has no blemish in it. Are you following me? It's my contention that Yeshua was in fact, and it has in my notes the third, but he was actually the 10th and final red heifer. When Yeshua was executed, he became the 10th and final red heifer. The number 10 means, according to Yahweh's word, it's completed. That's the summation of it. So be it. He was the 10th and final red heifer. I am not saying that there won't be a need for another physical red heifer, because if they do start up the sacrifices and the blood is shed, you'll have to have something as a cleansing agent. I understand the physical part of it, but Yeshua took care of the spiritual side. Amen? Do you think maybe Yeshua did fulfill that requirement? How many of you have ever read John chapter 2? It deals with the wedding in Cana, right? It's called the first miracle of Yeshua. Do you know what's happening there? Would you like to know what's happening at that particular ritual? Remember, it takes place on the third day. Did you know that in order to be cleansed from the flaw, you had to come and approach the priest on the third day? Did you know that? So it's not an accident that the third day this wedding takes place, right? Now, the third day is kind of ironic in that it can be used two different ways. It can be the third day of the week, or it can also be from the midweek, the third day, indicating the Sabbath. After 3 days, on the third day, the Sabbath. Are you following me? So it fits either way. But the interesting thing about it is that we're told we have to, and this is in Numbers chapter 19, verse 12, where you see this same remedy. You had to present yourself on the third and the seventh day. Now, the wedding took place in Cana. That word is translated reed. Oh, wow, isn't that odd? We had a reed that was used to offer Yeshua hyssop and vinegar. Isn't that odd? I wonder if maybe it could have had something to do, instead of a reed, if it could have had something to do with the cedar. It's just, you just weigh it out. It also comes from a word, it's kana, which can indicate a set of balances, a branch, a shaft, to get, to acquire, to possess, to purchase. The wedding took place in Cana of Galilee. It's called circuit. It comes from the word Galil, which means a place where something is rolled away. That's the place name where Joshua circumcised the children of Israel. And it was said right there, from this time forward, the reproach of Egypt. What was Egypt referred to? Death. The reproach of death was rolled away from you here at Galil. Are you beginning to see a connection? What happens when you have the ashes of the red heifer applied? The reproach of Egypt is rolled off of you. Does that make sense? Psalm 37 verse 5 says, commit your way unto Yahweh. Trust in him and he will bring it to pass. That's that word galal. In John chapter 2 verse 6 it says, at this wedding that they run out of wine. And his mother comes to him. It's ironic because there's only two people in the scriptures that's referred to as woman. He speaks to her and calls her woman here. The other time you see it referring to Eve back in Genesis. There's a connection here between Eve and Mary and the red heifer and Yeshua. 6 water pots of stone. Listen to this. After the manner of the purifying of the Jews. When the red heifer was slaughtered, the ashes were dispersed in water around Israel. And any individual who was found impure would come and cleanse himself in this water. And that's what's being shown you here. Yeshua is taking, now remember, these are stone vessels. History tells us that wine was not kept in that particular type vessel. What was kept in that particular type vessel was the ashes with the water from the red heifer. They had to, before they could come into this wedding, they had to come in and wash themselves and make clean before they went into the tabernacle. Before they went into the wedding chamber. Sounds like the tabernacle. Doesn't it not? The interesting thing is that Yeshua takes these 6 water pots and he tells his disciples, this is why it's a phenomenal miracle. Not that he takes water and turns it into wine, but the fact that he takes this water, which was bitter waters with caustic lye in them, he takes the bitter waters and he makes them sweet. In fact, so sweet that the host of the wedding says, you have taken the best wine and reserved it for last. The disciples look at what you just told. Nobody touches that but the high priest. Nobody had the right to put water into those stone water pots except for the priesthood. And yet Yeshua has the unmitigated gall to tell him to go get water, fill those water pots up, and then cleanse the rest of the people in the house. What he was just doing was telling him, I'm the high priest. I'm the one that has control of the living waters. Come unto me and drink. Hallelujah. That's powerful. There's another instance. You remember Matthew 27, verse 4? When Yeshua was standing in front of Pilate, and Pilate's doing everything he can to set Yeshua free. Remember? What does Pilate do? Why does he wash his hands? What is he washing his hands in? This is right before the preparation for the Passover. He's handling someone who's about to be killed. Pilate understood. The rabbis teach that Pilate had a Jewish mother. Pilate wasn't just taking soap and water and cleansing his hands. Pilate took the water from the ashes of the red heifer. What he was trying to do was saying, I'm going to be cleansed of this death. You and I have access to the cleansing waters. What do we do with them? Yeshua told them to fill the water pots. They filled them to the brim on the 3rd day, and in cleansing those who were sprinkled. It's kind of interesting because you see the same pattern in Exodus chapter 15 when the children of Israel are at the place called Marah, the bitter waters. They've been drinking from the bitter wine. In fact, all of the guests have been served the bitter wine, and the righteous branch, Yeshua, comes and gets involved in the waters. He's thrown right into the middle of the waters and makes them sweet so that the house can drink. Once more, the rabbis are right. When the divine presence left this tabernacle, we were contaminated with death. Yeshua's role in the ritual of the red heifer cleansed us from this same death. Death has no right over you. Sure, these physical bodies, if he tears, will lay down and go by way of the grave. But this is just a temporary thing we're traveling around in. It's that second death on the inside that I'm concerned about. That's the one that has to be cleansed from this water. But the interesting thing about it is that if you follow the rituals and you understand the spiritual analogy behind them, that para adamah can become the rapha of the Adam. It can become the healer of the Adam. It can become the mender of the Adam. It can become the one who sets you free. That's why the same thing that cleanses you from sin, what's easier? To tell a man to take up his bed and walk, or to say your sins are forgiven. You see the connection between the two? It's the same waters that have the ability to cleanse you as it does to heal you and set you free. He confirms that in chapter 2 of John, because as soon as this is finished, he goes into the physical temple and he drives out the money changers, and then he tells them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days, I'll raise it up. Why do you think that he was following the pattern if he was not following the same blueprint of the tabernacle temple from day one? He just showed you in John chapter 2, fulfilled it again later in that same book when he says, you destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll raise it up. And when it's raised up this time, it's going to be a building whose builder and maker is Yahweh. You, my friends, are the living stones built on a solid foundation. Hope you understood this teaching. Shabbat Shalom. Yahweh's worthy, isn't he?